a court has just ruled that the men's tennis world #1 Novak Djokovic has won his appeal against deportation. Now, the 34-year-old had been refused entry after the government said his visa was not valid as he didn't have a lawful exemption against vaccination. In a lengthy court case, though, a judge finally ruled in the tennis star's favour and ordered that he should be released from detention. It's worth pointing out, actually, that Novak Djokovic had been held in a hotel detention centre. The judge had said he could leave there in the past few hours because of internet connection problems, and so he'd been allowed to listen into that court case, which his lawyers conducted virtually from another location. We're not quite sure where Novak Djokovic is, but now Novak Djokovic, certainly for today, or as far as today is concerned, has been told that he can stay in Australia. That might not, though, be the end of the story, because we hear that the Australian government could yet order his deportation following an appeal against that decision in the past 20-40 minutes or so, as I say. Let's get the latest. Well, we're going to be in Australia in a moment, but first of all, let's go to Guy Delorney, who's in the Serbian capital, Belgrade. This has been followed, well, in Australia and where you are. It's caused a political spat in the last few days as well, Guy. What's the initial response there?
Well, the initial response in the headlines of the local media is jubilation. So to give you a sample of them, Novak beat Australia. The state knelt down before him. That was the headline from Blitz. A great victory. Justice is with the Serbs, says Novosti, and Courier just settles for victory. So you can imagine there's a lot of jubilation. This has been cast in extremely emotional terms by much of Serbia's media over the past few days. There's been very little nuance and quite a lot of personal attacks on Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia. So that's the initial response, although there's already warnings reflecting what you've been saying, that yes, the government of Australia does have recourse to other methods, and ultimately the minister could just order Novak Djokovic's deportation from Australia regardless of the court ruling.
How much debate has there been where you are, though, Guy, about the fact that he hasn't been vaccinated and had an exemption? Because he actually contracted, he got COVID, didn't he, a month or so ago?
Yes, that's right. There's not been a lot of debate in the media about this, to be honest with you. The media's been fairly all the way behind Novak Djokovic. When you talk to people around you in Serbia, friends, people you meet during the course of your reporting, those who've been vaccinated, to be honest with you, don't have as much sympathy with Novak Djokovic. They're saying, look, I've got vaccinated, why couldn't he just do it? And this is a country which is struggling to get its vaccination coverage up to a level that's truly effective. It's about 46.5% at the moment is the vaccination rate in Serbia. That's after it got off to a very fast start this time last year. And if somebody like Novak Djokovic came out and promoted vaccination against coronavirus, you could imagine that that number of vaccinated people would rise rapidly. So yes, there's plenty of support for Novak Djokovic, plenty of feeling that he's been treated unfairly in Australia. But when it comes to the vaccination issue, sympathies more or less cut down the middle, depending on whether you've been jabbed or not.
It's a big deal for him, of course. He's going for a record in terms of Grand Slams down there. But just going back to that vaccination, I mean, he'd had a physician's letter signed off by an eminent professor giving him this exemption. Now, did that come from where you are, or was that done internationally?
I'm not entirely clear on what the history is of how Novak Djokovic has proven his status in terms of recovery from coronavirus. His argument, or the arguments of his lawyers all the way down the line, has been that he received information from the Australian authorities that whatever information he provided had been accepted, and had been accepted as a valid document to allow him to enter Australia and not have to serve a quarantine. And that appears to be what the judges agreed with.
You talked about the diplomatic spat, the criticism of Scott Morrison. The Serbian president got quite heated about this as well, didn't he? So it's not just the press.
That's right. President Alexander Vucic talked about political ranting in Australia, and he talked about Scott Morrison by name when he talked about this. Now, of course, there is a bit of irony about one president ranting away about political ranting when it comes to the head of government of Australia, but we'll let that slide by for the moment. The noises coming out of Serbia over the past couple of days have been a little more conciliatory, shall we say. We've heard the Prime Minister Ana Brnabić saying whatever's happened here doesn't need to affect relations between Serbia and Australia as such. She thinks there's a bit of political campaigning going ahead of Australia's election, but nothing that needs to permanently damage relations.
All right, OK, Guy, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Blake Johnson, who I think can join us from Melbourne. Blake Johnson, a reporter with 7 News in Australia, who has been following the court case. He joins us from Melbourne. We're going to be outside the court in a moment as well. But Blake, as I say, has been following this. Blake, I hope you can hear me. I'm being told that you're being patched through at the moment. Blake Johnson, so when we were hearing the evidence in what has been quite a protracted court case, it seemed pretty clear which way the judge was going to go on this, and indeed he did. What has the reaction been there where you are?
It's a little surprising, to be honest. We weren't sure that we were going to get a decision today, but only about half an hour ago that came through. The judge really seemed to side with Novak Djokovic in what happened at the airport here on Wednesday night, saying that Border Force officials did not give Mr Djokovic enough time to consider his options, despite Mr Djokovic's pleas, saying, let me take a few hours, firstly to rest, secondly to get in touch with Tennis Australia officials and lawyers, because in his mind, he had done everything he needed to do to tick the boxes to prove that he had that vaccine exemption. But in the end, he was rushed into making a decision whether to either leave immediately or be put into immigration detention. And that was one of the main reasons the judge said in the past hour or so that his visa cancellation in itself should be cancelled.
OK, now, where is Novak Djokovic at the moment? Because he was allowed out of that detention centre, which is basically a hotel, isn't it? So do we know where he is at the moment?
Yep. We'd love to know. He was taken to a secret location away from that hotel to watch the live stream today, but we had all sorts of technical dramas with that live stream, tens of thousands of people wanting to watch around the world, and unfortunately the technology didn't quite catch up. So it was a little bit unclear to work out where and when he was taken. It was a secret location by order of the court. So we understand he was taken away from that immigration detention hotel. He'll no doubt return there tonight because he has to collect all his belongings. But the immigration minister here has 4 hours to make a decision at his discretion as to whether he will cancel Novak Djokovic's visa for a different reason or let him go and compete in the Australian Open tournament. Keeping in mind, tournament bosses have until tomorrow, it's 6 p.m. here in Melbourne, have until tomorrow to work out if Novak Djokovic will in fact be in that Australian Open draw, which the tournament starts next week.
Yeah, it starts on the 17th, doesn't it? Just go back to the immigration minister. So he could still revoke that, but on what grounds? I mean, was that aired in court?
Yes, it was. The lawyer for the federal government here said that the immigration minister might in fact take over from the Home Affairs Minister, which is the department that's been running the case against Mr Djokovic, and at the minister's discretion could in fact cancel Mr Djokovic's visa, despite the court ruling this afternoon. The reasons for that, not immediately clear. And as I said, he has 4 hours to make that decision. So although it is a win for now for Novak Djokovic and all his Serbian fans standing at the front of the federal court here in Melbourne, it definitely doesn't seal his fate in terms of being able to play in Melbourne at the Australian Open. 4 hours to go until the immigration minister has to make that decision.
All right. OK, Blake, good to speak to you. Thanks very much indeed. Let's go to our correspondent now, BBC correspondent Shaima Khalil, who joins us outside court. Shaima, hi there. And when I saw you, half an hour ago, you were surrounded by celebrating Serbs. Where have they all gone? Off to celebrate in a bar somewhere?
I think they've gone somewhere to central Melbourne. We're going to go and check on them. But you're absolutely right. The crowd here erupted in a huge cheer. And at that point, it wasn't really clear if something had happened, if the deliberations were still going on, the hearing were still going on, and we were trying to get lines. And indeed, it had been announced that the judge had overturned Australia's decision to revoke Novak Djokovic's visa. You know, for days they'd gathered outside the immigration detention hotel where Novak Djokovic was held. They'd been chanting his name, but also chanting, "Let him out, let him play." And now it seems that this is what happened. The judge ordered Novak Djokovic to be released from detention within the the next, well, less than 30 minutes now, a few minutes, and take part in the Australian Open and defend his title. Whether or not the government is going to exercise the right, the immigration minister is going to exercise his right and cancel his visa despite that decision by the judge. They still have a few hours to decide that. Whether this is the ideal move for them, on what grounds are they going to make that decision, we still don't know. But as it stands, this is a win for Novak Djokovic to take part and defend his title in the Australian Open.
How controversial has this been, though, for people in Melbourne? Because, you know, when you look at the country's attitude and reaction to coronavirus, the lockdown, the restrictions on personal liberty,
yep.
How much of a debate, how controversial has it been that the world's tennis #1 comes in and he's not even vaccinated?
Do you know, you only have to look at the Twitter feed to see how divided this is. I mean, yes, Novak Djokovic's supporters have been out, have been celebrating, have been calling for him to be let out. And their argument is he was given an exemption and he should enter and compete. But don't forget that Melbourne is the most locked down major city in the world, if you count the number of days. They've been in and out of lockdown so many times during the pandemic. Australia has had one of the most stringent rules of COVID-19. And essentially the condition for the freedom of movement, freedom of travel for people to be reunited with their families after these years had been to be fully vaccinated, and now people are being urged to take their boosters as well, and they've done that. Don't forget that this Omicron wave has made the case numbers skyrocket here in Australia. Thousands and thousands of cases for a country where one case at one point was enough to lock down. So if you look at all this context and the rules and regulations and restrictions that Australians had to go through, you can understand the anger on the other side. That why is it that a world-famous athlete who has famously said that he's against or opposed to the vaccination allowed to be given an exemption and compete in this tournament?